What if the one job nobody could survive for a month turned out to be the one thing that could save you? And what if, in saving yourself, you ended up saving the most dangerous man in the city from himself? This is the story of a woman who was hired to be a secretary but became a queen. It started, as most desperate stories do, with an eviction notice. Amara stared at the slip of paper, its stark red lettering a glaring symbol of her failure. Fired from her job as a paralegal for a mistake that wasn't hers, with rent due and her savings dwindling to dust, she was at the end of her rope. The classifieds were a graveyard of dead-end opportunities until one listing caught her eye. Executive Assistant to CEO of Gene Holdings. Discretion and resilience are paramount. Exceptionally high compensation. Previous applicants need not apply. The last line was the most telling. A quick, unsettling search online revealed whispers and rumors about its CEO, Gene Wu. He was a phantom, a ruthless corporate raider who had built an empire from the ashes of his rivals. But the darker corners of the web spoke of something more sinister, of ties to the criminal underworld, of a man who ruled with a fist of iron. The most persistent rumor was about his assistants. None lasted more than a month. They either quit in terror or were dismissed with an efficiency that was chilling. Amara's logical mind screamed at her to close the laptop, but the eviction notice on her table screamed louder. Resilience she had. Discretion she could learn. Desperation she had in spades. The Gene Tower was a shard of obsidian piercing the skyline, a monument to power and intimidation. Inside, the air was cold and silent, the marble floors reflecting a world too pristine, too perfect. Men in sharp, dark suits moved with a silent, predatory grace, their eyes missing nothing. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she was led to the top floor, a space of minimalist luxury that felt more like a mausoleum than an office. The man who greeted her wasn't the CEO, but his second-in-command, a man with a face carved from granite and eyes that held a lifetime of violence. "I am Mr. Choi," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You are brave or foolish to be here." The last girl cried for an hour before she ran out. Amara swallowed, her throat dry. "I don't have the luxury of crying," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tears don't pay the rent." A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes before he nodded towards a set of colossal ebony doors. "Mr. Gene will see you now. Do not waste his time." The office was an exercise in beautiful brutality. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a god's-eye view of the city sprawling below. The man standing before it was a silhouette of immense power. He wore an impeccably tailored black Mafia suit over a crisp white collared shirt, a uniform that did little to hide the raw strength in his frame. When he turned, Amara felt the air leave her lungs. Gene Wu was devastatingly handsome, with sharp, intelligent eyes that were as cold and empty as the space between stars. He didn't invite her to sit. He simply stared, his gaze a physical weight that pinned her to the spot. "Your resume is unimpressive," he began, his voice a silken threat. "Fired from your last position. No experience in an executive capacity. You speak 4 languages, yet you are working in a back-office cubicle. Explain why you are not wasting my time." The sheer arrogance of him lit a spark in Amara's chest, a flicker of defiance that burned away some of her fear. "My last boss had a habit of blaming his assistants for his own extracurricular activities with his interns. I was fired for my discretion, not my incompetence," she retorted, her chin lifting slightly. "And I may not have executive experience, but I learn fast, I don't scare easily, and as I told your welcoming committee outside, I'm desperate." "Desperate people are motivated people, Mr. Gene." A heavy silence descended. Gene Wu circled his massive desk, moving with the fluid grace of a panther. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the cold radiating from him. "This is not a normal office, Ms. Amara." He said her name as if testing its weight on his tongue. "The demands are absolute. The margin for error is 0. You will see things and hear things that you will take to your grave. The last 3 assistants failed. Do you know what happens to things that fail me?" He left the question hanging in the air, a venomous promise. She should have run. Every survival instinct screamed at her to turn and flee. But the image of the eviction notice held her fast. "I understand," she said, her voice a whisper that held the strength of steel. He watched her, his head tilted, a predator studying its strange, unblinking prey. He saw the fear in her eyes, but underneath it, he saw a spine that refused to bend. "It was interesting." 1 month, he said abruptly. "You have a probationary period of 1 month. You will be paid triple your previous salary. But if you fail, if you quit, or if I fire you, you will leave with nothing but the memory of this conversation. Do we have an agreement?" Amara met his gaze, her own dark eyes unwavering. "Yes, Mr. Jean. We do." Little did she know, that agreement was not just for a job, but for her entire life. Amara's first day was a baptism by Arctic fire. She was given a desk in an antechamber just outside Jean Woo's office, a sleek, sterile space that felt like a gilded cage. Mr. Choi provided her with a tablet loaded with a schedule so complex it looked like an algorithmic equation for chaos. Corporate takeovers were listed next to cryptic entries like package reception at Pier 7 and dinner with the serpent's head. Her job was to make it all flow seamlessly. The other employees treated her like a ghost, their eyes sliding past her with a mixture of pity and fear. They knew the history of that desk. It was a cursed post. Around noon, a whirlwind of charm and mischief blew into her pristine cage. "Well, you're new," a cheerful voice declared. She looked up to see a young man who shared Jean Woo's handsome features, but none of his chilling intensity. His eyes sparkled with humor, and his smile was a disarming flash of white.
"I'm Da Ehuin."
"And you are the brave soul who's taken the suicide seat," Amara raised an eyebrow. "I was told it was an executive assistant position." Dae-hyun laughed, a bright, genuine sound that felt alien in the oppressive silence. "That's just the polite term for it. My brother, Jean Woo, eats assistants for breakfast." "So, what's your name, brave soul?" "Amara," she said, a small smile touching her lips despite herself. "And I'm more of a lunch person. I plan on sticking around for a while." Dae-hyun's grin widened. He leaned conspiratorially over her desk. "I like you. You've got fire." But a word of advice: never, ever touch the coffee machine in his office. It has to be calibrated to a specific temperature, and the beans are sourced from a single mountain that he probably owns. The last girl, she used tap water. We haven't seen her since. The casual way he said it sent a shiver down her spine, but his playful demeanor made it hard to tell if he was serious. He was a confusing mix of light in a very dark place. Her first major task was to arrange a dinner meeting between Jean Woo and a rival family's patriarch. The instructions were precise and paranoid. A neutral location, no staff that wasn't pre-vetted, specific dietary restrictions that read more like a list of potential poisons to avoid. She spent hours coordinating, her old paralegal skills for cross-referencing details kicking into high gear. She confirmed everything twice, feeling a small surge of pride. Then, disaster struck. An hour before the meeting, she received an alert. The 5-star restaurant she had booked had a gas leak. It was being evacuated. Panic seized her, cold and sharp. Canceling was not an option. The instructions had made that clear. It would be seen as a sign of weakness, an insult. This was her first and probably last mistake. The call came less than a minute after the alert. Jean Woo's voice on the intercom was terrifyingly calm. "My office." Now Amara's blood ran cold. She took a deep breath, straightened her dress, and walked towards the ebony doors, feeling like she was marching to her own execution. Jean Woo was not at his desk. He was standing by the window again, a monolith of silent fury in his black Mafia suit. The tension in the room was so thick she could taste it. "The reservation at the Onyx Club," he said, his voice dangerously low. "It has been compromised." It wasn't a question. "There was a gas leak, Mr. Jean. The entire building was evacuated less than 5 minutes ago," she explained, her voice remarkably steady. "I am already working on a solution." He turned slowly, and the look in his eyes made her want to physically recoil. It was a glacial inferno of controlled rage. You are working on a solution? Did I hire you to prevent fires before they start? This dinner is not about food. It is about power. Your failure to secure the location is a sign of weakness. It makes me look weak, he advanced on her, his presence overwhelming. A competent assistant would have had 3 contingency plans. You have none, this was it. The end of her 1-month trial. But something inside her snapped. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a surge of indignation. She had worked her entire life to be meticulous, only to be railroaded by incompetent men. She would not let it happen again, not even with this powerful Korean Mafia boss. You're right, she said, her voice clear and cutting, shocking them both. I should have had a contingency plan. But you hired me 7 hours ago. I was given a dossier on your rivals that reads like a war criminals shopping list. I secured a 5-star, neutral location with a fully vetted staff in under an hour. I can't predict a gas leak, Mr. Jean. I'm an assistant, not an oracle. The silence that followed her outburst was absolute and terrifying. Jean Woo froze, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly.
No one had ever spoken to him like that.
He stared at the woman before him, this seemingly fragile creature who was now looking at him not with fear, but with a blazing, defiant fire in her eyes. The rage in his chest, which had been a roaring furnace, flickered and changed into something else, something he couldn't name. It was a confusing, unwelcome flicker of respect. Amara's heart was pounding. She waited for the words, "You're fired," to slice through the air. But they never came. Instead, Jinwoo walked back to his desk and tapped a button on his console. Mr. Choi.
Get the car.
We are moving the dinner to the Black Lotus. He looked back up at Amara, his expression an unreadable mask of cold control, but his eyes held a new, calculating light. The Black Lotus is one of our own establishments. Our rivals will see this as a power play, hosting them on my own territory. Your mistake has forced my hand into a more dominant position, he paused. Call the other party. Inform them of the change of venue. Your wording must be precise. You are not apologizing. You are informing. Amara stood stunned. She wasn't fired. He had taken her catastrophic failure and spun it into a strategic advantage. He was giving her a second chance. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her at the door. Amara, he said, do not mistake this for forgiveness. You are on a knife's edge. But you did not cry. And you did not cower. This is the only reason you are still standing here. Now go and fix your mess. She walked out of his office, her legs shaking but her head held high. She had faced the dragon in his den and had, somehow, survived. She had done the impossible. She had made it today too. This wasn't just a corporate job. It was a game of chess played with lives, and she was now, officially, a pawn on the board of a very dangerous king. The incident with the dinner reservation shifted something in the air between them. Jinwoo's demeanor remained cold, but he began to give her tasks that went beyond scheduling. He had her sit in on meetings, not to take notes, but to observe. He would occasionally ask for her opinion, his eyes searching hers for any hint of weakness. She, in turn, learned to navigate his moods and to read the silence as fluently as she read a contract. One evening, she was working late, finalizing logistics for a shipment of antiquities. The office was quiet. She overheard raised voices from Jinwoo's office. It was Jinwoo and Mr. Choi, speaking rapidly in Korean. Amara, whose grandmother had insisted she learn the language, froze. They know about the shipment, Mr. Choi said, his voice tight with urgency. The Serpent's crew is tipped off. They're planning an ambush at the port. Who is the leak? Jinwoo's voice was a low growl. We don't know yet. It has to be someone on the inside. Just then, the door slid open and Jinwoo and Mr. Choi strode out, their faces grim. They stopped short when they saw her. You're still here, Jinwoo stated, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. I had to confirm the final customs declarations, she said, trying to keep her voice even. He knew she spoke Korean, it was on her resume. He stared at her, a long, unnerving silence stretching between them. He was trying to see if she had understood, if she was a threat. Amara met his gaze directly. She made a split-second decision. "Whatever is wrong," she said softly, "I hope you find a way to protect your assets. It would be a shame to see any part of it liquidated unexpectedly." It was a gamble, a carefully worded sentence that showed she was aware of a problem without revealing how much she knew. It told him she was on his side. Mr. Choi's hand instinctively went to the inside of his jacket, but Jin-woo raised a single finger, stopping him. He walked towards her desk, his eyes never leaving hers. He was a king facing a potential traitor in his court. He picked up the tablet from her desk. "The port is compromised," he said, his voice a low whisper for her ears only. "The official transport is a decoy. I need you to arrange a new courier. An unofficial one. It must pick up a package from me, here, in 1 hour. No paper trail."
Can you do that?
She was no longer just a pawn. He was moving her to the center of the board. This was a test far beyond any job interview. It was a loyalty pledge. Amara's mind raced. She remembered a motorcycle courier from her old neighborhood who boasted he could get anything across the city in 20 minutes, no questions asked. He was perfect. She pulled out her personal cell phone, her fingers flying across the screen. Jin-woo was unnervingly still. He observed Amara not as an employee, but as a strategist observing a new piece on the board. She wasn't panicking. She was operating with a cool, detached focus. She finished her texts and placed her phone face down. She looked up. "A courier is on his way," she stated. "He goes by Phantom. He will be at the service entrance in 58 minutes. He will be wearing a blue helmet. He will ask the guard for a package for Mr. Blue. The guard is to give him whatever you provide. He has been paid for his time and his silence." The level of detail was absolute. Mr. Choi's stony expression flickered with surprise. Jin-woo simply nodded. He walked into his office and returned with a slim briefcase. He placed it not on her desk, but directly into her hands. The contact was electric, a jolt of warmth against the cold dread in her stomach. It was a transfer of trust, tangible and terrifyingly real. "See that it gets to him," Jin-woo commanded, but his eyes said, "Do not fail me." The hour that followed was the longest of Amara's life. She watched the security feed on her tablet, her heart a frantic drum as she saw a dark motorcycle pull up, the rider's blue helmet a beacon in the alley. The exchange was swift, clean, and anonymous. The Phantom was gone in less than 30 seconds. A message pinged on her personal phone. A single word. Delivered. She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. When Jin-woo finally emerged from his office, the grim lines around his mouth seemed to have softened. News had likely reached him that the ambush on the official convoy had yielded nothing but a truck full of cheap replicas. He had won, and she had been his secret weapon. "You're working late," he observed, his voice neutral. It was an invitation. "There were some details to finalize," she replied. "I've handled them." He walked over to the window. "Loyalty," he said, more to the glass than to her, "is the most expensive commodity. It can only be given." He turned to face her. "You could have run. You could have refused. Why did you stay?" Amara thought for a moment. "Because you didn't hire me to run," she said. "You hired me to be resilient. And because, for the first time, someone trusted me to handle something that mattered." A flicker of something vulnerable crossed his face, a crack in the marble facade that was gone as quickly as it appeared. He gave a curt nod. "I am having dinner brought up.
You will join me.
We need to discuss your new responsibilities." It was a command, but it felt different. That night, they ate in a comfortable silence, the vast office feeling strangely intimate. He asked her about her life, and he listened with an intensity that made her feel seen, truly seen. She, in turn, found herself watching the way a small smile would ghost his lips, the way his cold eyes would warm for a fraction of a second. The ruthless Mafia boss was still there, a dangerous undercurrent to every word, but she was beginning to see the man underneath, isolated, burdened, and utterly alone. The next few weeks marked a seismic shift. Amara became Jin-woo's shadow, his confidant. He valued her sharp intellect and her outsider's perspective. Her office was moved into his vast suite, her desk placed at a right angle to his, a symbol of their new partnership. The rest of the organization took notice. The looks of pity were replaced by expressions of awe and fear. She was the woman who had tamed the dragon. Their late-night dinners became a regular occurrence, evolving from silent meals to intense conversations about strategy, philosophy, and, occasionally, whispered fragments of their pasts. She learned his coldness was a shield, forged in the brutal climb to the top of the underworld. He learned her occasional clumsiness was a charming quirk that belied a core of unshakable integrity. The true test of their new dynamic came with an invitation to the annual Black Diamond Gala, a neutral ground where the city's elite, both legitimate and otherwise, came to mingle. As a powerful Korean Mafia boss, Jin-woo had to attend. "You'll be coming with me," he stated. "I need your eyes and ears." The night of the gala, a long, elegant box arrived at her apartment. Inside was a gown of deep sapphire silk that shimmered like a captured night sky. There was no note. When she met him in the lobby of the tower, he was breathtaking in a tailored tuxedo. His eyes swept over her, and for the first time, she saw him look at her not as an asset or an advisor, but as a woman. The cold control in his gaze was replaced by a raw, possessive heat that made her skin tingle. The gala was a glittering pit of vipers. Amara stayed close to Jin-woo's side, his hand a firm, guiding presence on the small of her back, a silent claim that did not go unnoticed. While Jin-woo was cornered by businessmen, Amara stepped onto a balcony for a breath of fresh air. A hulking man blocked her path. She recognized him from Jin-woo's files. Marco, the serpent's head, the very man whose ambush she had helped foil. "You're the new girl," Marco rasped, his eyes crawling over her.
Invest.
He must be getting soft. Amara stood her ground. "I'm nobody's pet," she replied, her voice steady. "And I'd advise you to watch your tone," Marco chuckled. "You have claws. I like that. But claws can be broken. Jin-woo is making enemies. A smart girl would know when to abandon a sinking ship. He was trying to intimidate her, to buy her. "My ship is quite seaworthy, thank you," she said coolly. "And my loyalty isn't for sale." Before she could move, a voice cut through the tension, smooth as silk and sharp as a razor. "Is there a problem here?" Jin-woo had appeared as if from nowhere, his posture relaxed, but his eyes holding a murderous promise. Marco's sneer faltered. "Just making a new acquaintance," he grunted, before disappearing. Jin-woo turned to Amara, his eyes searching hers for fear. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and laced with a concern that was achingly real. "I'm fine," she said, a little breathless. A slow smile touched Jin-woo's lips, a rare and devastating sight. "You never cease to surprise me." Just then, the orchestra began a slow waltz. Without a word, he took her hand and led her to the dance floor. He pulled her close, his arm wrapping securely around her waist. The world melted away, leaving only the two of them. "You weren't afraid of him," he murmured against her hair. "I was terrified," she confessed in a whisper. "But I've learned from my boss. Never let them see you weak." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. The space between them crackled with an energy more potent than any business deal. His gaze dropped to her lips, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he would kiss her right there, in the middle of a room full of their enemies. The moment on the dance floor lingered between them, but the underworld never sleeps. Amara couldn't shake the feeling that Marco's confidence on the balcony felt too secure. She began to work with a quiet, obsessive focus, cross-referencing every piece of data she could access. She was looking for a ghost in Jin-woo's impenetrable system. The clue came from the gala's security logs. She noticed a woman she recognized as Jin-woo's ex-girlfriend, Bianca, a woman who had supposedly left the country years ago after a bitter breakup, having a discreet conversation with one of Jin-woo's most trusted senior executives, Director Evans. Working late into the night, she delved into Evans' communications. After hours of digging, she found it, a hidden ledger, a series of untraceable payments from a holding company owned by Marco to an offshore account belonging to Evans. But there was more. The messages authorizing the payments were from Bianca. She was the one feeding Evans inside information, driven by a vindictive rage. It was a deeply personal betrayal. Her hands trembled as she downloaded the evidence. She had to get this to Jinwoo.
Now.
She took the private elevator to his penthouse. She found him in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "What is it?" he asked, seeing her pale face. Wordlessly, she handed him the drive. She watched as the cold, hard mask of the powerful Korean Mafia boss settled over his features as he read. When he was finished, his face was a terrifying blank canvas. He wasn't enraged. He was empty. "Thank you, Amara," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "I built this empire on one rule: cut out the poison before it spreads." "I grew careless," he turned back to her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. It was a look of profound, painful gratitude. "You have become my greatest asset," he said softly. Just as the words left his mouth, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Choi. One picture. It was Amara's apartment door, kicked in and hanging off its hinges. The traitors knew they had been discovered, and they had just made their final, desperate move. The emptiness in Jinwoo's eyes vanished, replaced by a volcanic, protective fury. Every ounce of his cold control shattered, revealing the ruthless predator he kept caged inside. "Mr. Choi is on his way to you," he growled into the phone. "Secure the building." He ended the call and turned to Amara. "They won't find you here. You're staying with me." This was no longer about business. It was about her. The traitors, Evans and Bianca, had made a fatal error. They had targeted the one thing in the world he was not willing to lose. The next few hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Jinwoo, with Amara at his side, orchestrated the takedown of his enemies with chilling efficiency. Mr. Choi's teams moved like ghosts through the city, apprehending Director Evans as he tried to flee the country. Marco's operations were systematically dismantled, but Bianca remained in the wind. Jinwoo knew she would be driven by her hatred for him and her jealousy of Amara. He knew where she would go. He left Amara in the penthouse with 2 trusted guards. "Do not leave this room," he commanded. "I will handle this." But Amara was not the same woman who had walked into his office a month ago. She would not be a damsel locked in a tower. Using her knowledge of the building, she found a service access panel and made her way to the top floor. She had to make sure he was safe. She found him in the office where it all began. And he was not alone. Bianca was there, a small pistol clutched in her trembling hand. "You always did have a weakness for strays, Jinwoo," she spat, her gaze flicking to Amara as she emerged from the shadows. "But this one took my place." "You never had a place," Jinwoo said, his voice dangerously calm as he positioned himself subtly in front of Amara. "You had a price. You sold my loyalty to the highest bidder." In a desperate, final act, Bianca lunged not at Jinwoo, but at Amara. But Amara was ready. She used her clumsiness as a weapon, sidestepping and sticking out her foot. Bianca tumbled, the gun skittering across the marble floor. Mr. Choi appeared in the doorway, and the standoff was over. The danger was past. Jinwoo turned to Amara, his face a mask of raw, unfiltered emotion. The cold facade was gone, burned away by the terror of almost losing her. He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him. "I thought," he began, his voice thick and unsteady. "Don't you ever do that again. Don't you ever put yourself in danger for me." She looked up at him, her own fear melting away in the warmth of his embrace. "You hired me to be resilient," she whispered, echoing her own words from that first day. He stared down at her, his dark eyes filled with a love so fierce it was overwhelming. "I hired an assistant," he murmured, his thumb gently caressing her cheek. "But I found a queen," and then he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, passionate declaration, a culmination of every unspoken word, every shared glance, every moment of tension and trust. It was the sealing of a new dynasty, built not on fear, but on a loyalty that had been earned in fire. Weeks later, the Jean Holdings Tower felt different. It felt like a home. Dae-hyun greeted Amara every morning with a cheerful "morning, sister-in-law," and even Jinwoo's formidable mother had given her a rare, approving smile. Amara stood beside Jinwoo, looking out at the city that was now theirs. She was no longer a down-on-her-luck secretary. She was a woman who had walked into a wolf's den and had not only survived but had calmed the beast and captured his heart. She wasn't just the woman who lasted more than a month. She was the woman who changed the game forever.